Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is my usual Thursday live stream. After all of the excitement of season 8 of Game of Thrones, we're getting back into our usual pattern of Thursday live streams. This one is an open Q&A. It's going to be a solo open Q&A. Future weeks we'll get back to having guests on and working our way through subjects. But I think this time, and possibly next week as well, we'll just have an open Q&A for any questions that are left over from season 8 of Game of Thrones, anything about A Song of Ice and Fire. And I think perhaps also I've been revealing a little bit about a few of the things I'm going to be covering over the course of the next few months. Any questions about those things like Lord of the Rings, Black Mirror coming up, Westworld season 3 as well. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover. As always, the way that I'm structuring this is that I've got questions from my patrons. Patrons, thank you. I can't do this without you. This is one of the ways that I thank you, is by giving you priority in terms of questions for my live streams. I'll be working my way through my questions from my patrons. If there's any super chats, I'll be trying to answer them as quickly as I can as we go through, and I'll pick up as many other questions from the chat as we move along. So let's get into, I had a couple of super chats actually already. Let's get to them. So Frown Pouch, thank you very much, saying can't be there today but have an important question. How are you? Well, thank you. That's very kind and a lovely way to start the live stream. I'm well, thank you. It's been a busy few weeks with the season and a few other things going on, but I am happy, excited, and actually really looking forward for the next few months just to be sharing a lot wider sort of content, looking at things like Lord of the Rings, which I love as well. So thank you. Yes, I'm doing really well, and I'm looking forward with a lot of optimism about the course of the next year. And morally, very generous super chats before we go. Thank you, Maura. I really appreciate it. Saying just a show of love, appreciation, and support for all the excellent content. Looking forward to more of the Traveler's Guide and visiting Bravos this Friday. This series is my favorite on your channel. Yeah, so the Traveler's Guide is returning. I suspect it might be Saturday rather than Friday. Everything seems to be pushed back a day for me this week, but yes, we're getting back into the Traveler's Guide. The Traveler's Guide is going to be moving through Essos. We're going to have 3 or 4 weeks in Bravos, I expect, and then moving on through Volantis, Old Valyria, and all the rest of it. So really looking forward to that. Kelly Zahara, actually, just while I see that in the chat, are you going to, hi Kelly, by the way, are you going to do a Westworld season 3 trailer breakdown? I've been asked this a few times. There was a teaser trailer for those who are interested in Westworld. There was a teaser trailer about a week ago. In fact, it was it aired just before the Game of Thrones finale. It was a teaser trailer, really, rather than a full trailer. It was introducing Aaron Paul's new character. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until the first full trailer. They're only partway through filming at the moment. I'm going to wait until the first full trailer, and then I will cover both that and the teaser trailer at the same time. So I will be covering it, but not in isolation, if that makes sense. But yeah, I thought it was a really good, just as a very quick review, I thought it was a really good teaser trailer, showing that they're moving beyond just the park. It's going to be a lot more focused on the outside world, and it had a kind of a Blade Runner-y feel to it, which I love, because Blade Runner is one of my favorite films ever. And I thought that it worked really well with this kind of idea, again, about what is real running through it and the search for real. And that seems to be what they are teeing up as one of the big themes of this season. So I'm really looking forward to it. And as I say, I will be covering it, but not just immediately. I'm going to wait for the full trailer to be coming out. A lot of guys asking about a few other things that I'm doing later on. I will get to them in the second half of this live stream. Broadly, I'm going to try and cover the Game of Thrones stuff in the first half, and then later on, I'm going to be trying to look at a few of the other things that we're going to be covering. So let's get into a few questions about Game of Thrones. Donna Daly, first of all, says, as Bran moves away from being Bran to becoming a Greenseer, do you think that the personality change will be as drastic in the books? If it is as drastic, do do you think that we will continue to have Bran chapters in much the same way we no longer have Catelyn chapters? While writing this, I realized that a similar question could be asked about Jon. I think this is a really good question to be starting with. So with Bran, clearly in the books, he's been getting fewer and fewer chapters. And I think this is partly reflective of the way on the show he actually got less and less screen time. In fact, there was a whole season when he wasn't there at all. In Dance with Dragons, I think he only had 2 chapters, whereas, if you go back to book 1, he had quite a lot more than that. So I think, yes, we're going to see a slow reduction in the chapters from his point of view, because I think we will see him going through this process of becoming less and less himself. And I think that will be reflected, as has been the case with other Starks and other characters, in the name that is given to his chapter. It's not just going to be Bran anymore. There will come a point when it says, the Green Seer or the Three-Eyed Crow or something to hint that he's moved away from just being Bran. And I still hold to this thought that perhaps the final chapter we get in A Song of Ice and Fire is going to be a Bran chapter. I think that would work really well. It would be very, very hard to do, but George R. R. Martin, I'm sure, is up to it. But I think between where we are now and where we end up there, yes, we will probably have a reduction in the amount of point of view chapters from Bran. Enough to know what's going on in his little bit up in Bloodraven's cave and then coming down to Winterfell. But then after that, I imagine the story is going to be picked up by the other characters in Winterfell rather than Bran. So I thought that was a fascinating question. And Jojo Lady Dane, I agree, they were great chapters, but they were deliberately cutting down on the information that we get from Bran personally. Related to this, Brooke Gear Pearson says, "Hi Robert, now that Bran or the Three-Eyed Raven is king," this is the show question, how will that affect the other religions of Westeros? Will the old gods come south? What other ramifications can you see? Now, I think this is a really interesting one. This is effectively, this is what is Bran's religious policy going to be as king? Now, my take on this has to be, so this isn't Bran anymore. This is the Weirwood Network. What do they want for Westeros? Well, they're wanting ice and fire, these forces that could destroy the planet effectively, them to be not there. So they want them out of the way. So I suspect that R'hllor, for example, the worship of R'hllor will not be encouraged. However, things like the Faith of the Seven, it's, in the grand scheme of things, quite a benign religion. It's, as long as it doesn't get overtaken by the fanaticism we've seen a number of times through history over the last few hundred years, actually it's not that threatening to the Earth, which effectively was what the Weirwood Network is about. It's about preserving the natural, saying the natural environment is probably underplaying it a bit. It's about preserving Westeros as a place, and the Weirwood Network as the memory and life and heartbeat of that. So that is what it's trying to do, and I think that some religions won't really make a difference. Other religions that perhaps might be seeking to encourage the return of either ice or fire probably would not be encouraged, which, as I say, I think would include worship of the Lord of Light. Live Chill Life, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, "Hi Robert, I hope to get to Con of Thrones as I live close to Nashville." Yeah, I will definitely be at Con of Thrones. I'm looking forward to meeting as many people who will be there. I know that of the people watching this, only a small proportion will be at Con of Thrones, which is why I'm not talking about it too much, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to meeting as many people as I can. Are there weirwoods in the south for Bran to connect with? Yes. So in the on the show, it's very clear that Bran has reached a point of sort of mastery of his skills that he doesn't really need a weirwood anymore. He can just sort of like access the power, the magic of the weirwood network without actually sort of touching or hooking up to the weirwood network physically. So I don't think that there's a particular need for that. However, in terms of the specifics, yes, there are weirwoods in the south. There are quite a few, in fact. A lot were chopped down. There isn't, as far as we can tell, in places like King's Landing, but in some of the deeper woods, we hear of there being some weirwoods that have survived. And there is a sort of an arc. If you look on the map of Westeros, there's this kind of arc that sort of comes down from the north across through the Riverlands, where there are a lot of places that have got weirwood trees. Now, these places like the Isle of Faces, there's High Heart, though, where there definitely were lots of chopped down, but there definitely were. There's Raventree Hall and so on. There's even some in places you might not expect, like Casterly Rock. So they are dotted about. It's just that they aren't the focus of the sort of the religious life as they are up in the north. So yes, is the short answer, but I don't, on the show, they're playing this up that it doesn't really matter. Nana Al says, please comment on the idea that Emilia Clarke's portrayal in the early seasons of George R. R. Martin's dialogue and plot brought a vividness, a Frostian radiance to the role that elevated her character immediately to something more conventionally heroic, which of course was increased as the show moved beyond the books. But Dany was always a bit headstrong and a wild card. So I could easily imagine book Dany turning out as she did. So that's, so this is an interesting point as to why Daenerys's turn came as such a shock to quite a lot of people. Now, part of this is that it wasn't built up. We should be honest that it didn't have as long and detailed a build up as it will in the books. And yes, I think something similar will happen in the books. But I think it's definitely worth acknowledging this point that the way that Emilia Clarke played the character and the way that she was presumably directed to play did create her as a lot more of a stereotypical hero than in the books, where we see inside her mind and she's a lot more nuanced or torn in different directions, we have to say. So yes, I think that it's her portrayal did kind of lull people into this kind of false sense of security, but I think it's as much that we didn't actually see inside her mind. So all we saw were her occasionally saying, I'm going to burn down a city, and Tyrion say, oh no, please don't, and then she changed her mind. And so that didn't really convince us that she meant it. Whereas in the books, we can see her thought patterns and thought processes. And so that, I think, is really the big thing that's missing between the books and the show, is the ability to actually understand. And Al Bundy, I see in the chat saying, Emilia's such a nice person in real life, it makes the contrast even greater. She played her, and as a character, as a person, she came across a lot nicer than perhaps she does always in the books. As I say, in the books, that's not to say she's a nasty character in the books in any way. It's just that she has more layers. She has torn in more directions. Jason Gard says, I'm reading the Hedge Knight graphic novels about Dunk and Egg to scratch the Game of Thrones itch. Now the season's over, really enjoying them. They are fantastic. If you are looking for something to read, Song of Ice and Fire related, and you haven't read Dunk and Egg stories, please do. There's only 3 of them so far, but they're all short, but they're wonderfully written. They're a lot lighter in style than A Song of Ice and Fire. Very, very easy to get into, and creating and introducing to really lovable characters. So please do check those out. Care to share your thoughts and some background on Egg and how he fits into the Targaryen family tree? Also, is the concept of a hedge knight addressed in the Ice and Fire books? Is it historically accurate role for freelance knights? Well, to pick up on that last bit, there are always historians in the chat who know a whole lot more about this than I do, but the short answer, my best understanding, so this is the derivation of the word freelance. When we think about freelancers today, we think of people who they're not tied down to a particular employer. They can choose where they lend their services, and it was because that's where some knights back in the medieval times, they were freelancers. They weren't. They didn't owe a long-term loyalty to a particular lord or master in some way. So yes, this was a thing, and so it's not just something invented by George R.R. Martin. In terms of Egg, there's no spoilers here. The whole point about the Dunk and Egg stories is they're written 100 years or so before A Song of Ice and Fire, so we know what happened to the characters. We're just enjoying the stories of their lives. But Egg grew up to become Aegon V. Now, Aegon V was known as Aegon the Unlikely because he was never thought to be likely to inherit. He was a long way down the pecking order. And actually what we see through the Dunk and Egg stories, we've seen it already, we're going to see it a little bit more, is this process of all of the people between Egg and the throne dying for various reasons. A lot of them seem to be connected to Dunk in some way. And this, just not him killing them off, but just it seems to be around his actions. He seems to be some sort of a catalyst for what's going on here. And there's a theory video on this, which I've got somewhere in the back of my mind. At some point, I will put it out there that Dunk is some kind of, and I haven't quite yet thought of the exact phrase for it, but an unintentional magical catalyst for things happening, where he goes around and the things that he does have an impact and they make a difference. And primarily, it's getting Egg onto the throne. So the why it's important that Egg gets onto the throne is that it is he who does things in an attempt to bring back dragons, creates the tragedy of Summerhall, which immediately again kills himself and a few other people and hastens the arrival of the line of Jaehaerys II down through Aerys II, the Mad King, the father, of course, of Rhaegar. Now, what that means is, in simple terms, Aegon, Egg, is the grandfather of, he says, just double-checking in his mind, the grandfather of the Mad King. And it is of this line that we are told that the prince that was promised was going to be coming from. So Egg is sort of, the rule of Aegon V is sort of what leads into this current and final line of Targaryens that we have. So that is his big role that he's got going on there. And he will, I feel sure, have a huge, and we will see through the books, have a huge impact on a number of other things. Just to pick one randomly, it was him who sent Bloodraven to the wall. So, but for him sending Bloodraven to the wall, and Maester Aemon also decided to go up then as well, we wouldn't have had Bloodraven as the Three-Eyed Crow and all the things that followed from that. So he and Dunk seem to be some kind of catalyst for a huge amount of things going on. So they are important, but they do not think of themselves as being particularly important. They're just living their little lives. So I hope that one that sort of helps there. He grows up to become a king, and the stories will tell all of his life, we're told, the lives of Dunk and Egg, right up to the tragedy at Summerhall. So for all of those of us who have been fascinated by the tragedy at Summerhall, wondering what was going on there, we will find out when the Dunk and Egg stories get that far. Who knows when that'll be? I imagine that they won't be finished until after Song of Ice and Fire is finished, so it will probably be quite a few years away. But that's the theory, anyway. Kaylee B says, hi, Robert. I was wondering, do you think that as time passes by, fans will dislike the end of season 8 less? Once the shock of the abrupt change has settled in a little bit, do you think people's opinions might change too? The Star Wars prequels seem to have been better received as years have passed. Okay, so yes and no, I think, is my answer to this. There are a number of objections to what happened in season 8. Some of them are to do with the writing and the speed at which stories were delivered, changes in character arcs, things like that. Those things, I think, are legitimate concerns. Those things, I think, will probably linger in people's minds. However, there are a few things that, whereas that some people just immediately damned the whole season, I have seen immediately, particularly in response to the documentary, I've forgotten what it was called off the top of my head, but the official Game of Thrones kind of making of behind the scenes documentary that aired the week after the final episode. That showed, and it was brilliant, by the way, do watch it. That showed behind the scenes what was going on. It introduced us to the extras, to the costumes and makeup people, to the guy whose job it was to make sure there was snow in the right places at the right times, the people doing the T-bar, all of the people behind the scenes. And that, I think, has reminded a lot of us of quite how many extraordinary things there were about this season. And so I think that now we're starting to move more into a world of nuance for a lot of people, which wasn't there to start with. But there was an initial reaction against something, but now I suspect almost everyone would say, yes, okay, I may have these gripes, but clearly the music was amazing. Clearly the acting was fantastic. Clearly the set design, clearly the costumes, clearly all these other things were brilliant. So I think that we've already moved to this kind of world of slightly more nuanced reflection on the season. I think what will happen, though, the big thing in terms of the storylines will be partly when the community as a whole starts to reread, and interestingly, Aziz, who comes on here quite a few times from History of Westeros, has already started rereading A Song of Ice and Fire with a view to hints of Bran being king. And his view is that when you start looking for them, there are lots of bits of foreshadowing. And I would trust Aziz there completely. And I think that as the community starts rereading through things, stuff like that will start to become more and more apparent. And particularly when the books themselves happen and we see how many things were in George R.R. Martin's plans that did happen. Like, for example, what Daenerys did, I think something very similar will happen in the books. Won't be the exact same circumstances, but something similar will happen in the books. I think Jon will kill Daenerys in the books again. So I think that these big beats of the plot will be the same, and I think that people will come to terms with that. And I think that the biggest thing, and a lot of people are saying this and have been saying this for a while, the biggest thing against season 8 was how it was rushed, and therefore some of the storylines felt rushed, and therefore things were made to be a shock in a way that in the books they won't. So that, I think, is the big thing that we're going to see. That, I think, was, incidentally, I think it was deliberate on the part of the showrunners. They seem to be big fans of shock and surprise as vehicles of storytelling. So I think that this was an intentional thing on their part. But I think that we will see that as being the big difference between what happens in the books and what happens in the show, and how people view the show going forward. Susan D, thank you so much for that super chat, very generous. Would you ever consider reading a Bronte novel for your Well Told Tale channel? I'm loving the time machine. Yeah, so thank you very much. In terms of the Well Told Tale, for those who don't know, this is my second channel. It's my audio narration channel. Basically, I read what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. It's done weekly. I took a couple of weeks off just because I had too much going on, but we're now back in the rhythm of doing weekly episodes. Currently working through The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which is fantastic. We've covered things like The Call of Cthulhu, Frankenstein, all of the classics. In terms of the Bronte, we're doing any Bronte novels, I think potentially what I'm looking to do is to focus the channel in on science fiction, fantasy, and speculative fiction. Now, what I mean by that is stories with an element of kind of something speculative beyond the sort of just a historically based novel. So that doesn't mean things that have traditionally been pigeonholed as science fiction or whatever. So, for example, at Christmas I did A Christmas Carol, which is a supernatural story, and I think for me that counts. So I am very happy to be having a look at a whole range of things that fit into this broad category. Whether any of the Bronte things do, possibly. Let me have a think on that. I'm very open to ideas. But the focus, I think, for me is very much this reintroducing people to the classics. This is what I'm wanting to do. There are so many amazing stories out there that I think they bear rereading and re-listening to again. In the future, and I'm already starting to do this, to look into this, and is to try and get a few more modern classics as well, some stories that have been prize-winning stories over the last few years, and see whether I can be negotiating to get some of them on the channel as well. But yeah, so that's the plan. I think it should go without saying that the Bronte stories are excellent and certainly up to the scratch. And yeah, Jojo Lady Dane, Wuthering Heights has a bit of a supernatural feel. That's why I was sort of like trying to work out whether or not I would count it there. Devi Dane, as we're talking about this, Devi Dane, Dorian Gray, Picture of Dorian Gray is definitely on the list. I will be doing that at some point soon. H.P. Lovecraft, yes, I've done Call of Cthulhu. I will definitely be doing at least one more H.P. Lovecraft at some point really soon. I think I will, what's coming next after The Time Machine, I will probably do another Edgar Allan Poe. And then I want to move on to maybe Metropolis, which is the film was a seminal science fiction film, and there's a story which that was based on, which I really love to read. So I'm going to see whether that works well as an audiobook. So perhaps I'm going to be going there. And lots of great ideas in the chat, by the way. I can see them all coming through. Thank you. I will have a look through all of those after the live stream. Let's go to Krishna Bhargav. Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire question. The glass candles that are burning and the maesters want to keep a check on magic. They have sadly been proven right based on what we saw in the bells. Yes, so the show didn't really go down this route with the maesters. The maesters have got a long-standing opposition to magic, and I did a whole series couple of years ago, called series of videos called Magic Maesters and the Faceless Men, just tying all of these little hints together as to what might have been going on. I am firmly of the belief that the Maesters, yes, as some people have been suggesting, they definitely were behind, or it's the death of dragons on a number of different occasions. So, and on the show, they didn't really play with this. They turned it more into a kind of just their academic talking shop more than anything else. But in the books, I think we will see a lot more. The second part of that question from Krishna was the Faceless Men who stole a secret book from the Citadel. Can we get any insights on the contents of the book or its importance in the Winds of Winter? So this is in the books, Jaqen H'ghar, you saw it on the show, he removed his face as he was saying goodbye to Arya way back in season, whatever it was, 2 maybe, and he's got a different face now. The description of that face matches up to a character who much later in the books appears in the Citadel and takes on the persona of somebody called Pate, who's studying there. Now, the question is, what are the Faceless Men doing in the Citadel? What might they be after? And the hints are that they might be after this book, which is colloquially known as The Death of Dragons, or its proper name apparently is Blood and Fire. Obviously, the fire and blood the other way round. Now, they haven't yet got it. It appears to be, there's just rumors about it. Tyrion remembers it vaguely. It appears to be sort of in lock and key, under lock and key somewhere down in the vaults of the Citadel. So it's a matter of getting to it and then trying to figure out what's in there. But the hint has to be in the title. This is, people want to read this because this is about how to kill a dragon. And the Faceless Men want to kill dragons. Go back and have a look at those videos if you're interested in my logic, which leads me to that. But they, I think, want to be killing dragons. And I think also the Maesters will be. So although they probably don't know it yet, they're probably both on the same side. But it's a matter of what they're going to do once they get that information. How do they kill a dragon, or will they try to kill a dragon? And this is the bit that I think is going to be fascinating because in the books, because the fate of the 3 dragons is not going to be exactly the same. I could certainly see what happened with Viserion being the same. Rhaegal, for me, that didn't chime as being exactly what's going to happen in the books. George R. R. Martin has said very clearly that grown dragons, a scorpion bolt would not just go through the armor like that. It would have to be a direct shot into the eye. So just being shot out of the air doesn't seem likely. There seems likely that something else happens to Rhaegal. Could this be the Faceless Men trying to do it? Because the show basically cut them out of the wider story, but they clearly are up to something. So it's possible that there's something bigger going on there. Kathy Stark says, Robert, I've been listening to A Dance with Dragons lately, and I'm not sure who, besides Theon, knows that Jeyne Poole isn't Arya. I believe I've picked up on Roose, Ramsay, Cersei, and Jaime. Okay, so this is... Jeyne Poole is a character who's in the books, and some of her storyline was taken on by Sansa in the show. She is childhood friend of Sansa, and she comes down season 1, book 1, with the Stark family to King's Landing. She survives what happens with the killing of Ned and Ned's retinue, and then she kind of appears much later on, pretending to be, or having people pretending that she is Arya Stark, and she is then married to Ramsay, and then escapes with Theon. So that bit of Sansa's storyline on the show about being married to Ramsay and then escaping with Theon, that is actually with a character called Jeyne Poole, who everyone says is Arya. Now, it's very clear that this was set up in the books as a way, as it was in the show, as a way to kind of validate the Boltons taking control of Winterfell and being lords of Winter, in charge of the North, basically. Now, the question is, who knows that this is just a ruse, a pretense? Because Arya, don't forget, as far as everyone's in Westeros is concerned, Arya just disappeared. She was with Ned Stark's retinue, then everybody got killed, and then she hasn't been seen since. In reality, obviously, she escaped, she went out, and then she eventually ended up in Braavos, but nobody's seen her for years, so she's missing, presumed dead. In terms of who knows that this person who the Boltons are claiming is Arya Stark actually isn't Arya Stark, well, yes, you're right, the Boltons don't. The Littlefinger is involved in this. He was the person who seems to have taken her on down in King's Landing, and it's hinted that she was sort of put to use in his brothels. And then he was the one who'd come up with this plan to be sort of sending her up to Winterfell, to the Boltons. So that seems to be the route there. Jaime, when told that she's Arya Stark, says, no, that's not Arya Stark. And Brienne happens to be there at the time, and he tells Brienne that that's not Arya Stark, because Brienne is obviously about to go off hunting for the Stark children. So Brienne knows as well, Littlefinger knows as well, and when she gets up to Winterfell, yes, they go through this kind of sham marriage, and she suffers all the horrors of being married to Ramsay Bolton that Sansa suffered in the show. And there, although off the top of my head, none of the characters around explicitly say or admit that they know that this isn't Arya, then there are quite a few people who seem to be quite suspicious. One of them is Barbary Dustin, who's a very clever cookie, a great character in the books. And also, when in the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter, when her and Theon had escaped, she is questioned by Crowfood about just to try and prove that she is Arya Stark. And the only reason why people would be doing that is if they were doubting that she might be Arya Stark. So it's clearly hinted that a lot of people aren't convinced, but the people who don't know, the people you've mentioned, plus Littlefinger and Brienne. And shortly, she's about to be sent up to Castle Black to see Jon Snow. Shortly, Jon will obviously also realise that. Donald Peoples, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, wish I could stick around, but I'll finish up on a rewatch. Thanks for your excellent work, and as usual, it's always a pleasure. Thank you, I really appreciate that. Just top up my water. Howland's little sister, let me just quickly double check I've not missed any super chats. I'll just quickly flick back through. Oh, I did miss one from Sarah Norrie, apologies, saying, why didn't Brienne follow Sansa back north? Is this, oh, this is in the show, I assume. So this is a, it's not explained, because they did just do these little snapshots at the end of the season. The clear implication of what happened was that Bran, having become king, then needs a Kingsguard, because obviously all the old Kingsguard have gone, and he decides that he's going to have Brienne, and so he makes Brienne Lord Commander of the new Kingsguard. Hod also joins the Kingsguard, it would appear. Now, I'm sure Sansa could have said, or well, whether she would have actually said no. She is a queen herself, so she could have just said no. She's sworn to me. I imagine that what she would have done would release Brienne from her vows and said, yes, okay, you can serve here as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Sansa, probably for the first time in her life as queen, with a sympathetic king in King's Landing, felt safe and therefore did not feel the need to keep Brienne on. That's the implication. We weren't told it, but that seems to have been what was going on there. But I was about to get to a question from Howland's little sister saying, if you could produce and write the sequel series that is being planned about the past of Westeros, what would your series look like? What would the overall storyline be? This is a great question. What would I do if I could write it? Well, if the setting is, as it appears to be, the Age of Heroes, the Long Night, that kind of thing, I think it would be hard not to write this over a period of a few years. They would necessarily have to condense a few things, but with the pact, the creation of the White Walkers, the first long night, the creation of the Night's Watch, the building of the wall, all of these kind of things, just to show us what actually happened back then. That, I think, for me, would be what I would do. And I think it would make a good, not just creating a little bit of backstory, but actually it would do what the show didn't do, which was have a proper long night and a proper sense of dread that we have lost. On the show, we had the Army of the Dead approaching, and then there was a big battle, and the Army of the Dead lost, and the long night was a night. Now, the long night, the legends go, lasted for years. And during that time, it appears that humanity thought that they had lost, and we're down to the last hero and people like this who are hunting for the children of the forest to try and get their help. And this is just how do we possibly salvage this situation, rather than how can we stop this from happening. So I think that's a different story, and it was one that I would love to see. And if they can tie that in across somehow to the founding of Valyria and things like that, that would work perfectly for me. Don't know whether they'll be able to do that, but that would be what my aim would be. Romy Xaviera Vendocult, apologies for butchering your name, but thank you so much for the super chat. Just to say thank you for all your great streams and videos. Unfortunately, I need to go for now. I hope to join you all again soon, and shout out to all the fantastic moderators. Good night. Well, thank you. And indeed, moderators. The moderators are the unsung heroes of this community and of my channel. The guys there did so much immense work during the season, and if you're in the chat, you may well have spotted it, but there were, at any given time, watching particularly the live streams just before an episode, there were people trying to drop in spoilers all the time, and the moderators were absolutely all over it and did a fantastic job, and helped people who didn't want to have it spoiled for them really enjoy watching the show. So they've done an amazing job, and I'm incredibly grateful. Guys, if you could show the moderators a little bit of love, I would really appreciate it. They are amazing. So thank you. Clark says, in the question about the final episode, when Dany is giving her victory or rallying cry, are we to believe that Jon and Arya suddenly understand the language? An oversight, surely. Also, do you think Dany was going to go mad? Queen, irrespective of Jon finding out he's really Aegon? Well, in terms of the victory or the rallying cry, the way they seem to do it was that if she's talking in normal, then people can understand. If she's talking in Valyrian with the subtitles, then people can't understand. But I think that regardless of whether or not they can understand, the tone and the way she set that up was very obvious. I don't think you could have got any other message from that. This was not her appearing and go, oops, guys, I really shouldn't have done that. This was her with a victory and rally, and it was very obvious from the way she set it up. So I don't think that even if they couldn't understand what she was saying, I think they could, but even if they couldn't, I don't think that the message would have been lost on them. In terms of the second part, was Dany going to go Mad Queen irrespective of Jon finding out he's really Aegon? Now, I did a video on all of this. My take is that this is much more multi-layered. The way that the show set it up is that that moment, and actually Emilia Clarke explains it really well, how she was trying to put it across, was that in that moment, there are so many things just bubbling up. There's loss, there's pain, there's anger, there's betrayal. There's so much stuff that just bubbled through into anger, which, whether or not we sympathize with it, I think we can recognize the fact that those kind of negative emotions bubbling up into anger is a very human thing to happen. She just happened to be sitting on top of a dragon at that time, and when she let rip, that actually had huge impacts. Other people would go out and kick a cat. That would be really bad for the cat, but it wouldn't impact on the entirety of King's Landing. So that's the big difference, is the fact that she is who she is, and therefore what she does matters so much more. And I think that the Mad Queen thing that's a thing that people in the show say, but I don't think that we need to necessarily buy into that as language. This is, yes, she has a number of Targaryen traits that she clearly shows, with this being slightly flame happy. All the way through, her first response to opposition is to burn people, and we have to accept that that's been the case all the way through, whether we think it's justified or not. But you look at the warlocks in Karth, you look at the Carls, you look at what happened with the Masters of the Unsullied, you look at the Tarleys. Every time she met any resistance, her first instinct was always to burn people. And that was what was going on here. So it was kind of signposted. Whether she would have made that same, or the pain and anger and all the rest of it would have bubbled over in the same way if there hadn't been the whole issue with Jon discovering he's Aegon, I think that's a slight imponderable. It would have led to a very different feeling and situation going on there, but I hesitate to say that this is all about the relationship between those two in any way. It's a lot more layered than that. Let's quickly go into the chat. A couple of quick questions. So Carla Mosqueda saying, is it true that George R.R. Martin wrote the Red Wedding chapter last for that book because it was too painful to write, though he knew it was going to happen? Could this be why The Winds of Winter is so difficult for him? Yes, it is right about, as I understand it, at least about the Red Wedding, was that he found that a really hard chapter to write. I think that The Winds of Winter, there are a few things. First of all, this is a big book. He talks about 1,500 manuscript pages now. You can hear lots of different people saying what a manuscript page equates to in real book pages, but that's a lot of material. And so I think part of it is that he is simply writing a huge amount. Secondly, I think that he's realized that the plot is huge, and he's having to put all his best into making sure that everything connects up. The story, broadly speaking, the story sort of starts up small and it goes out, and then, as we saw on the show, particularly in last season, it then started coming back in again, all the characters coming together, the plot lines starting to tie off. he's not yet reached that point in the books. It's still slightly expanding out, and it's only during the Winds of Winter that things are going to start coming back in again. So the story is at its biggest at the moment. And so I think that's it. And also, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that actually, compared to the time it took him to write the last book, that was, I think, 7 years. This is about 7 years. We should expect it around now. So this seems to be his usual writing pace, given the fact that he's also written a huge amount of other stuff during this time. My own pet theory is that there was an element of he felt a little bit of pressure. He's admitted this, felt a little bit of pressure to get it done, written before the show finished. But when the show has finished, then that burden has lifted a little. So I think that there's that going on as well. Donna Daly, thank you for the super chat, says, in the books, magic is an intrinsic part of all the Living Stark storyline other than Sansa. Do you think this will change? Yeah, so Sansa is the least magical, it's fair to say, of the Starks. I think that will it change? Well, her direwolf is dead, which means that element is not there. So when we talk about Arya, most of the magical stuff, yes, she's starting to get a little bit more into the magical elements of the Faceless Men, but really it was mostly her link across on Nymeria. Jon has definitely been having lots of dreams and things, but also there's his link across. So she hasn't had that kind of link across. And Sansa has been the least Stark-like Starks, to be honest, wanting to head down to King's Landing and then being kept away from the rest of the Starks up now in the Eyrie. I think that perhaps she will embrace it a little bit more back in Winterfell, but still, no, her role is not that of the magic role. Her role there is, as her direwolf's name was, Lady. That's where she's heading. She's heading to be the Lady of Winterfell. That's where her character arc is taking. And she doesn't need that extra layer of magic in order to do that. In fact, if anything, that would be a slight hindrance for her very human character arc that she's been going through. Kia Foster saying, do you think it's possible that Jon will not come back in the books? And what we've seen past season 5 is a merging of Jon with Fagon's storyline. Now, well, I like thinking. So for those who don't know, Aegon is in the books. He's another character who claims to be a Targaryen. He's probably a Blackfire, in my opinion, a sort of an offshoot of the Targaryen family. But he has a lot of things, or will have a lot of things, that will sort of back up his claim, like having the Golden Company, having John Connington on his side, and I think he will soon have the sword Blackfire as well. So I kind of understand the idea that Jon's story on the show might have kind of been merged, have taken elements on from that. However, George R. R. Martin, the way he's written it certainly seems to imply that Jon himself will survive. There are Dany's visions in the House of the Undying hint at him, and so there was no point in that if he's not going to appear in her future. There's a huge amount of foreshadowing and his dreams and things like that seem to be leading up to somewhere. So it all makes sense for his storyline to continue. And George R. R. Martin has specifically said that Beric in the books is foreshadowing of Jon in the sense of showing that you can die and come back. So that seems to be what's going to be happening. I guess what will happen is that he will actually walk into Ghost and then be brought back from having walked into Ghost, be brought back into his body, which will probably be kept in the ice cells so it won't decompose and stuff like that. So I think that's what's going to be happening with him. I like the idea that some of Aegon Fagon's storyline may well have been drawn in. That might well be to do with what happens at King's Landing as much as anything else. But no, I think Jon will survive in the books. He will come back. He will be brought back through a combination of his own warging and Melisandre's magic. So that's my take on that. So James Warrad just spotted saying, by my rough calculation, The Winds of Winter is about 450,000 words. That's about as long as the entirety of Lord of the Rings or 4 Dunes. Yeah, so I don't know the exact numbers on this one, but that seems to be roughly what people are thinking. This is a massive story that he's writing, and this book, it would not surprise me if this book is released as 2 parts. So yes, it's going to be The Winds of Winter, but it'll be The Winds of Winter parts 1 and 2. Lahiru Dinalankana says, if Dany gets pregnant again and loses that baby as well, may make her lose her sanity, like her daddy, like her father after Duskendale. Nice beard, Robert. Oh, thank you very much. I was just thinking I need to trim it a little bit. But in terms of getting pregnant and losing that baby, so there are hints that in the last chapter, her last chapter of The Winds of Winter, that perhaps she either was pregnant or perhaps is now capable of having children once again. It's all a little bit, she eats some strange berries and it's not entirely clear exactly what's happening all the time, but there are some hints that perhaps that's where it's heading. I don't think that she is just going to snap and go mad. I think she's going to remain this kind of figure who has a number of different sides, who has a good side and has a which is all about trying to release and free slaves and things like that. And she also has a bad side, which is about burning people. And I think that this is very much how George R.R. Martin writes characters, that they are capable of both great good and great evil. And I think that to try and get characters to say these are good characters or bad characters, or they are mad or they are not mad, that is not the way that George R.R. Martin wants us to see characters. I think he wants us to see them as multi-layered, as capable of many different things, good things and bad things. There are very few completely good or completely bad characters in Song of Ice and Fire, most multi-layered characters. Lady Tia saying, others are asking if Sansa will marry Sweet Robin in the books or on the show. So on the show, Robin Arryn was certainly looking a lot more eligible, shall we say, in season 8. Now, I personally don't think if they're going back to the way that they used to run things, which seems to be roughly what they were doing. Yes, they had the whole Great Council thing, but broadly speaking, they were returning to how things were before, but with just an agreement that there's no a hereditary principle in terms of the king of the 6 kingdoms. Sansa would therefore not marry the lord of another major house. That wouldn't be the way it would work. She would probably marry the second son or maybe the first son of a major, not non-major but big house or something along those lines. So the Starks historically they married with a lot of the major houses in the north. So we get stories of them marrying the Mormonts, and there's obviously they branched off into the Karstarks and things like that. So they would often marry with other houses that are just like one rung down, not equivalent type houses. In the books, Probably again, no. I don't think that that's going to happen. It's a nice sort of thought, but I think that Sansa is being set up as a kind of an Elizabeth I figure who may not marry at all. That would certainly be in keeping with her own sort of character arc of where she's been heading. She doesn't need to marry. She could always just sort of adopt, if she wants to choose who her heir is. She could adopt somebody, or she could just simply state, this person over here is my heir. That's the way she could do it. She doesn't have to marry. If she does marry, it's because she wants to, and it's on her terms, not for a particular political reason, I think. Sheely NY, thank you so much for the super chat. Just saying, no question, just thanks for what you do. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Let's quickly go back to some questions from my patrons. Michelle says, hi Robert, I'm a show-only fan about to audio read GRRM's books in publication order, but would like some visuals to go with it. Well, first of all, that's great. I'm really pleased you're reading the books. It's they add so much extra stuff to what we see on the show. That's why people like me can talk about it for so long. Is there a picture book I could use as a companion? I believe that after watching the show with the stunning visual, I don't think I can use my imagination. I need maps and family trees, etc. Well, there's a lot. So I saw actually on Patreon somebody did reply and recommend a wiki of Ice and Fire, which is online. Just Google it. It's fantastic. Yes, there's lots of great pictures in there. There's some family trees. If you like Google House Targaryen, then you get a massive family tree going on there. If you want a proper book with some maps, there is an official George R.R. Martin approved book called The Lands of Ice and Fire, which has got maps of Westeros and a lot of different cities, like there's one of Bravos and things like that, so you can actually see and visualize what each of these different cities are about. So I would recommend having a look for that. But yeah, so there's lots out there, and I think, yeah, a wiki of Ice and Fire is probably your best starting point. But if you want the maps, the Lands of Ice and Fire. And Dan Campbell says, in any of the books or on the show, has Cersei ever told Jaime that she loves him? Has she said that to anyone, including herself? This is an excellent question. I can't remember that she has directly. Now, this is one of those ones where I'm hoping somebody in the chat will immediately be able to come up with an instance. I think the Cersei as a character sees those kinds of things as signs of vulnerability. She clearly does love her children. She clearly does love or is obsessed with Jaime. She clearly feels that strong link. Whether she actually says, I love you, I don't know. Whether I can't off the top of my head think of an instance where she has done. But I think the fact that I struggle to think of examples of where that is tells you about how she views this. It's something she sees as a vulnerability, love and familiar relationships and all the rest of it. And so she will not want to be allowing that kind of vulnerability in. Donna Daly, thank you again. By the end of the show, there is no need for the Night's Watch. Bran and Sansa know this. Do you think Jon's sentence was them tricking the Unsullied? I don't think it was them tricking the Unsullied so much. It was a compromise. I think they came out with some weird form of words that there will always be a need for there to be a place to be sending prisoners and all the rest of it. They're sort of equivalent of sending people to outer Siberia or whatever. This is the I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think it was a deliberate attempt to trick the Unsullied. I think that the immediate need for the Night's Watch has clearly gone. They are now seeing it merely as a kind of a pragmatic a solution to what do we do with some people who we want to get out of the way. And in terms of the wall itself, it is now, if you actually think about it, the North has seceded from the Seven Kingdoms. So this is no longer a Seven Kingdoms thing. This is the border of the North. So there is a need as the North for the border to somehow be maintained, patrolled, whatever. Whether you need a massive wall and a full-time guard doing that is, it's another question entirely. But it is a political border between where the North is and where other people are. So there is potentially still a need for it. It's not a completely made up thing, but it would clearly have a very different purpose. Kevin Warner, thank you so much for the super chat. Saying, love your work. Thank you. Will Thursday live streams continue? And what do you think of the Tyrion and Penny storyline going forward? So in answer to the will the Thursday live streams keep going? Yes, this is, I've been doing these Thursday live streams pretty much every week now for about the last 18 months. I consider this to be a really important part of what I do here as a channel, as a chance not just to create a video and put it out there, but actually to interact with people, to hear questions, to kind of bounce ideas off of people. And also, I know I'm doing this one solo, but what I loved doing is bringing in other content creators, other experts, people that can give a slightly different perspective. I don't own a monopoly on wisdom or knowledge. There are other people who've got lots of fantastic information that and perspectives on things that I really want to be able to introduce people to. So yes, I will be carrying on doing this on Thursdays. I will probably be doing take a couple of weeks off over the summer just to have a little bit of a break. But generally speaking, yes, I'm going to carry on doing this. What do you think of the Tyrion and Penny storyline going forward? So this is a book question. Tyrion in the books is not yet in Meereen, in Dany's service or anything like that. He's sort of outside the walls at the moment. There's a big war about to happen, or big battle about to happen. Penny is a character that he's got this kind of weird, it's not a love relationship. She seems to be quite into him. He seems to be quite borderline abusive to her sometimes, but does also care about her. I have this feeling that he is not going to treat her well and is probably just going to leave her by the wayside when he actually gets back to where he has been, which is walking the corridors of power. Penny is just a useful thing for him when he is not at his former station. Now, I say that I love the character of Tyrion because I find him the most interesting and riveting character to read, but that doesn't mean I always like him as a character. I think that he does some pretty horrendous things at times. And I don't think that Penny is going to survive. I think she's going to be there and just another person that he can look back on and feel a little bit sad about the fact that he mistreated her in the past. That's probably where I see that one going. It's a shame, but yeah, that's what I reckon will happen. I'm just going to quickly check that I haven't missed any more super chats. Friendly neighborhood Pit A says, Bloodraven's 1,000 eyes and one. Who might have one eye? So Bloodraven is said to have had 1,000 eyes and one. The one because he had just one eye himself, and 1,000 eyes because he had a spy network everywhere. That was where it originally came from. And then when he got he went north of the wall and became the three-eyed crow and all the rest of it, then that kind of still fits because he might still have one eye, but he can use eyes from birds and things that he can walk into. So that is what is going on there. What is really interesting, and at some point I may do a video on, I've sort of touched on it in a number of different ways, is looking at the other characters who kind of mirror Bloodraven in the fact that they've just got the one eye. So Euron is one clear example, and he's got the crow imagery, and he's clearly magical. We get Beric as well. It doesn't come across as strongly on the show, but when he's first seen, he's seen sitting in a weirwood throne, effectively. He's sitting there in the roots of a weirwood tree. So there are lots of kind of reflections of him, and I don't think that that's coincidental. I think this is George R. R. Martin trying to show us links between different characters. So I'm not entirely sure whether that was where you're trying to get at with this question, but that's it's certainly the kind of the hint that there are the one-eyed characters are connected in some way. Okay, let's go to Maura Lee with a question from Patreon saying, it felt like the Night King and the White Walkers were one-dimensional, just baddies for Arya to help take down once she killed the Night King with the Valyrian steel dagger. There are 2 more books left, and there is the Blood Moon prequel. Will we get to learn more about the others and their motivation? Also asking about Benjen. So in terms of the others, I think we will learn more about them both in the books and also in the prequel. So I think that in terms of the books, I think we haven't yet had Bran having that. However it works in the show and the books, it will probably be slightly different, but that contact with the Night King, where the Night King branded him and all the rest of it, and before that, when he saw the creation of the White Walkers, that we will get something like that, I'm sure, in the books as well, and we will learn about the nature of the others and what they're about. And I think that is we've been promised by George R. R. Martin that we will see further north than we have before in the Winds of Winter. And given the fact that we've gone as far north as the Fist of the First Men, I think this means we're going to see all the way up to the Heart of Winter. I think we're probably through Bran and Visions. I think that's where we're going to be heading off. So we will see more there. We will also, I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but with Blood Moon, the prequel spin-off, then I think that this is set. George R. R. Martin wants it to be called, it's not going to be called that, I think, but he wants it to be called The Long Night, which clearly is a hint that is what this is actually about. It's about the first long night. And so I think that we're going to see back then exactly what happened in a lot more detail, therefore what they were wanting. On the more broad point, Maura, yeah, I agree. The show completely just turned them eventually into this kind of slightly one-dimensional or possibly two-dimensional baddies who came just looking to dole out death and vengeance. I don't think that's what we're going to find in the books. There will be a hint of what we had before, but they will definitely be given a stronger narrative and motivation. George R. R. Martin says many times, everyone's a hero in their own story. I think he will want us to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and not just because they want to kill everybody. Here, Foster says the Night King turned Craster's sons while they were alive. Should they have fallen when the Night King did? Maybe a show-only concept, but could they still be out there? Yeah, so there's a difference between what the Night King seemed to do to whites and to create White Walkers. So with whites, then they when they're dead, and then he raised them again, and sort of controlling, sort of like a weird warped version of warging into something. That seems to be what was going on there. The White Walkers, he converted the living into White Walkers in a kind of an echo of what happened to him, and that was what was happening to Craster's babies. Now, one of the bits of understanding that we didn't get was exactly what was going on with Craster's babies. Do they grow very quickly and become grown-up White Walkers, and were they the ones that we saw? Do they sort of sit up in the far north in some kind of White Walker nursery until they grow up? What's going on there? We don't really know. We weren't really told about it, but the implication was that in the show and show lore, when the Night King died, everyone that the Night King had turned into a White Walker also died and shattered into bits. And then everybody that had been controlled by any of the White Walkers all then collapsed. That seemed to be what was happening. So in terms of Craster's son, they would also have fallen, and they would have shattered at the same time, even if they were up in their White Walker nursery in the far north. Bettina Nielsen, thank you so much for the super chat. Didn't see a question there, but thank you very much. And Susan Dunkel, thank you, saying, are you excited for season 3 of Westworld? Looks amazing. Yeah, I'm going to get on now to a few other things that I'm going to be covering over the next few months. And yes, I am looking forward to Westworld season 3. It really is looking fantastic. I'll use this as a sort of a brief pause between talking about Game of Thrones and talking about other things, though, just to let you know a few things that are coming up on my channel. The Traveller's Guide to Westeros is going to be carrying on. It's going to be Traveller's Guide to Essos, because we're moving over to Braavos. The next one of that is going to probably be on Saturday. I was aiming for Friday. I think it'll actually end up being Saturday that comes out, but then that's going to be back into a weekly rhythm of producing the Traveller's Guide every week, hopefully on the Friday again. So we're going to be getting back into that. I've got one more video to be doing about season 8, which is probably going to be quite a big video, just trying to sort out how the ending in the books will be different. So that's me saying this is what happened in the show, clearly. Which bits can we expect to happen in the books? Where will there be differences in the books? And so I think that's something. It might take me a couple of weeks to sort of draw out all of those things, but that video is definitely coming. And then I've got lots of other bits of content that I'm going to be talking about in just a moment, and I've got questions from my patrons, which kind of draw these out. The first thing that you will probably see, which is not Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire related content, will probably be a couple of videos about Black Mirror. It's a show I love. It's on Netflix. They're standalone stories, so you don't have to watch from the beginning with Black Mirror. You can go straight in at the new season, which is coming out next week. There's only 3 episodes there, so they're 3 standalone stories. You could just watch any of them that take your fancy, and I will do breakdowns of those episodes. And if there's enough interest after that, I will also start doing some breakdowns of previous Black Mirror episodes as well. I would highly recommend it. They are stories, people often talk about them being like modern Twilight Zone. To my mind, they're actually slightly different and probably slightly better in that they are intelligently written. Annabelle Jones, Charlie Brooker, fantastic writers. And they look at the impact of technology on humanity, but not in the kind of the, wow, this is really cool, but actually what do little changes in technology mean for us as human beings? And they're always incredibly thought-provoking. You watch one and you go away and go, wow, what does that actually mean for us and our lives right now? So it's fascinating stuff. So I'm highly really excited to doing it. I'm Enja saying the Prime Minister pig thing put me off. Yeah, that was one episode. If you didn't like it, they are all different. So please do watch a different one just to get. If you don't like it, that's absolutely fine, of course. But I would not judge the series based on one of them. Okay, let's get into some other things that I'm going to be doing. Just to sort of finish up what I was saying earlier, Leathery Wing says, I'm looking forward to the Traveller's Guide to Essos. This is going to be starting this week. Other than that, will you be doing any other Song of Ice and Fire content before the Winds of Winter is finished or Blood Moon trailers begin appearing? Yes, so I will be. For those who were with me with the channel, following the channel before season 8, I was doing quite a long-running series, working my way through Robert's Rebellion, Attorney at Harrenhal, and the Tower of Joy, and just trying to unpick exactly what was happening and all of that. We've reached the Tower of Joy. I kind of paused it for season 8. We've reached the Tower of Joy. I've got probably 3 or 4 more videos in that series just to round all of that off. I've got a video that I've almost written, and so I just need to sort of polish it and record it and things like that. That's looking at the question of the Tower of Joy. Why did they fight? Why was it that you get the King's Guard who were defending Lyanna and her child? Why was it that they fought Ned, who was trying to rescue Lyanna and her child? There is a reason, but it's not immediately apparent. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to follow up with a few more videos just to finish off that series. And then you're asking about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Will you be making videos or doing live streams based on the books before the series begins? Yes. So for those who don't know, there will be, so Amazon have bought the rights to make a TV series based in Middle-earth, the world of the Lord of the Rings. It's going to be 5 seasons worth. They have invested stupid amounts of money in this. Various reports of like up to $500 million to make this show. So this is going to be massive. They have appointed writers now, but as far as I'm aware, they've not got scripts done yet. They've not even started with casting. They have decided a few details like where they're going to film up in Scotland, which is great, it's beautiful. But they're still a long way off. They have to have started production, as I understand it, by November next year. So I think that we're looking still a couple of years before that actually happens, which is a long way of saying I'm not just going to be covering the show. That's not happening for a couple of years. I love Lord of the Rings. I love Tolkien and the whole world that he created. I'm diving back into the books at the moment. This is my bedtime reading at the moment. I'm just going back through the Lord of the Rings, and then I'll work my way back through the Silmarillion and all the rest of it. I will start creating content at some point over the summer about that world more generally. I haven't worked out exactly what yet, but it's definitely part of the plan. I've been talking to a few other people who are going to be doing things to do with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. So yes, it will be coming, and I will be doing things in advance of the show happening. Mama Joe in the chat saying, do you plan to cover his Dark Materials if they do it justice? So his Dark Materials, the Philip Pullman stories, BBC, I think it might be BBC and someone else have been producing a new TV show, a series based on his Dark Materials. It looks great from the trailer. The trailer they released about a month or so ago. Ruth Wilson, Mrs. Coulter. Ruth Wilson's amazing. and I'm really pleased that they've got her there. They've got a number of other really great actors in there as well, so it looks good. I may well do it. I haven't decided yet. That's on my long list. What I don't want to do is just like cover lots and lots and lots of random things all over the place. So I want to cover 3, 4, maybe 5 kind of shows or books, series in detail, rather than just sort of spreading myself too thinly. So yes, I'm really interested in it. I'm definitely going to be watching it. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to cover it. James Sidney says, I'm very excited for your upcoming Lord of the Rings content. As much as I love A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm by far a bigger Tolkien fan. We have to talk about Tom Bombadil at Con of Thrones. Well, absolutely, I'd love to talk about Tom Bombadil. My question is about a potential Traveller's Guide, the Middle-earth edition. Would you like to focus on the Third Age, the Second Age, like the coming show? Build a submarine to visit Beleriand, or go and visit Valinor. So yeah, I like the idea of doing a Traveller's Guide to Middle-earth. I think that's the kind of thing I've not thought of in any detail, other than, yes, that seems like a fun idea to do a Traveller's Guide to Middle-earth. Perhaps I would do it in the Second Age if I did it nearer to the show. I think it probably depends on when I do it. Doing so, for those who do not know, the Third Age is when the stories that we know, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, that's when they occur. The TV show is apparently going to be based in the Second Age, which is a long time before that, which means that most of the characters we know won't be there. A few of the really long-lived ones, like Gandalf, could well make an appearance. The Eagles will be there, things like that. But it means that there's a whole sort of continents, or big islands at least, like Numenor, which are there, which weren't there during the time of Lord of the Rings. There's a whole range of geopolitics. It's probably going to be, I suspect, centered around the creation of the Rings of Power. I think that's where they're going to head with all of this. So that is the period we're talking about. But yeah, if I do it nearer the show time, then I would probably do it during the Second Age, because I think that that's something people will be a lot less aware of what's going on there, just as a way to kind of explore the land. Traveller's Guide to Arda, yeah. So I would, I might call it Traveller's Guide to Middle Earth, because it's people would understand what that means. But yeah, Traveller's Guide to Arda. Jojo Lady Dane saying, how about Good Omens? Just a quick series review when it's done, please. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to... so many good ideas, guys, by the way. Lots of really good shows coming out over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. Good Omens, for those who don't know it, amazingly good book, very funny, written by Neil Gaiman and the late, great Terry Pratchett. One of my favorite books, I have to say, and they've turned it into a TV series. I think that is joint BBC Amazon. I might be wrong on that, but that's going to be starring David Tennant and Michael Sheen, who are both excellent. And it looks, from the trailers, again, it looks amazing. So I will definitely be watching it. I think it depends on whether I have time. The fact that it's, as I understand it, it's very faithful to the books, because Neil Gaiman himself wrote the screenplay. So there's not going to be much sort of additional lore or information I can add into it. So if I do anything, yes, it might be just like a one-off rather than sort of like an episode-by-episode breakdown, because I think that there's slightly less than I could personally add in on that one. Where are we at? So Maura Lee, just while we're talking about Lord of the Rings, Maura Lee says, compare and contrast some of your favorite key central characters, the Song of Ice and Fire show or book series, with some of the key central characters in the Lord of the Rings. I know George R. R. Martin drew a lot of his inspiration from the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So I think I'll pick just a couple. It's a good question because there are clear parallels, but George R. R. Martin is not um, just picking characters and dropping from Lord of the Rings and dropping them into A Song of Ice and Fire. The one that I uh, talk about the most, because I think it's the strongest parallel, is Jon and Frodo. And it's not in terms of their story or even necessarily in terms of their character. It's more in terms of their role, is that they are the protagonists without ever really being the heroes of the story in classical sense. They are the protagonists of a lot of what happens. And the ending of Jon's ending in the show, I suspect it'll be the same in the books, was very like Frodo's. He looked as if everything that he'd been fighting for, he no longer fitted in that world. Is that he couldn't return back to Winterfell, to where he was before. He didn't even, he got sent to the Wall. Even Castle Black wasn't what he'd fought for. That wasn't there. He needed to move on to a new land that was more in tune with who he was. In the same way that Frodo at the end of The Lord of the Rings had to head off to the west because the future belonged to people like Sam Gamgee and his family, not Frodo. And this is the same way that Jon had to head off into the north because the future belonged to people like Samwise Tarly. Samwell Tarly, sorry, getting my Sams confused. So there's a clear echo there. I had Kyle from Azora Hypon, just as a little twist on this. He was here on Sunday, just as we're doing our final review of season 8, and he was talking about, and I don't know if he's done the video yet, but he was talking about parallels between Frodo and Arya, because both sailed off west at the end. Now, I find that a really interesting parallel because, yes, they both sail off west, and yes, there is also this kind of feel for Arya as what's left for her. She's been fighting for this world, as it were. She's been fighting for the Starks, but she is not. She's never wanted to be a lady, so that role is not there anymore. She doesn't want to go back to being a faceless man, so that is not there anymore. She has turned her back on vengeance and on all the rest of it, so that is not there anymore. So what is left? To go west. Now, I think that the difference between her and Frodo is that Frodo was heading somewhere effectively to retire because he's world weary, he's had enough. He's going with a particular destination in mind. Effectively, he's being led off by the elves. He allows himself, he's got the invite and he goes off. Arya doesn't. She is still very much in control of her own destiny. This is an active decision of her to go west because she does not know what is there, because she wants to discover what is there, because she needs new adventures, new stimulation, new interest and excitement, a new purpose. That is very different in my mind to what was going on with Frodo. So I think that there are similarities, but there are also differences. I'm really glad Kyle brought that one up because I thought it was a really interesting one to just kind of work our way around what the comparisons are. Let's go back to another question from my patrons. This is about Westworld. Dow Brinksma says, "Thank you for the great content. You're very welcome. Although I'm a huge sci-fi fan, I'm not sold on watching Westworld. Could you give me some kind of elevator pitch on why I should watch the series? What is so special about the storytelling, characters, philosophy, etc.?" Okay, well, I am very happy to do that. I don't know whether it'll turn into an elevator pitch or not, because I don't think that that's how it boils down. a point about Westworld is that this is intelligently written and multi-layered. This, to start with, yes, this is the story of, no spoilers here, this is the story of cowboy robots, and it's quite fun and it's good, but it immediately starts using that conceit to explore philosophical ideas of identity and the like. So if you think about the kind of the Blade Runner notion of how do I know who I am, the question that keeps on coming up in Westworld season 1 is, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? And this is, how can you be sure of the things that you're sure about? And so it builds up a number of kind of psychological and philosophical levels of inquiry through this mechanism of Westworld, and it keeps on going. So it starts off very small. Season 1, again, no spoilers, but season 1 is basically set in Westworld, as you would expect. Season 2 starts to expand. Season 3 expands even further. It's like they're pulling the lens back each season. Now, in terms of why that matters, is that I personally like well-written, intelligently written stories. I think that the main selling points are astonishingly good kind of ensemble casts. You get people like Anthony Hopkins, who you expect to be brilliant and are brilliant. You get people like Tandy Newton that were amazing. But across the piece, the cast are astonishingly good. The writing is done well. The thing that I have huge respect for is that they, unlike, say, Game of Thrones, which they produced on an annual turnover, this last time they stretched it out to 18 months. Westworld, they've said, no, we're going to take as long as we need for each season. This is why it's like a couple of years between each season, because they're going to take the time to write it properly and not rush it. And I respect that. So I think for me, it is it's intelligently written, it's very well acted, it raises a huge amount of kind of questions in your mind at the end of each episode, and it rewards close viewing in a way that it's not just stuff that's there. In order for you to follow the plot, you have to actually be paying attention to what's going on. So it's not an easy watch, particularly the further into the plot you get, but it's a rewarding experience in my view. So Dina Lankara says, when show only watchers say what's west of Westeros, I smile and say a shy Saffron Straits and Yee. The look on their face is priceless. It feels good. Yeah, so the Thanatos is a globe is the short answer. This is, I think, a reference to Alyssa Farben. So for those who are show-only people, the Arya heading west is a big nod to Alyssa Farben, who's a character that we were properly introduced to in Fire and Blood, the George R. R. Martin sort of history book that he came out with last year. She got a great backstory. I won't go into all of it, but she did manage to buy herself a boat, a ship that was like the best that money could buy, and she headed west just to see what was there. And she just kept on going, and she didn't come back. But many, many years later, somebody else, Corlys Velaryon, who was another great sailor, headed east and got as far as Ashai, and he saw a ship that he swore was that same ship that Alyssa Farben had sailed west. So the clear implication is that she'd sailed west. Whatever she discovered, we don't know, but she'd come all the way around the map and had come out to the east of Essos, and that was what was going on there. So yeah, it's there's a lot going on there. Chrissy Bolstones, thank you very much. Saying check my Twitter. This is how my moderators let me know. The chat sometimes moves very quickly. I sometimes spot things. Super chat question from Bettine Nielsen. Do you think Jon will return more feral as a result of walking into Ghost? And a big thank you to Robert and the mods. Well, big thank you to the moderators here. In terms of will Jon return more feral as a result of walking into Ghost? Yeah, I think probably he will. The kind of what we see happening when somebody is walking into a wolf is that they sort of become the wolf, obviously, and that does kind of start playing into who they are. And over time, then actually the wolf will start overtaking them. So if you stayed in a wolf for a year, then the wolf would start to reclaim ownership of the wolf, and you would slowly become subsumed. That's what we're told about what happens. Now, Jon, I don't know how long Jon is going to be in Ghost for, but it will be for a period of time, and I think it will strengthen the bond that he has with Ghost. When he returns, he will not be the same, partly because he's been resurrected, brought back by the power of the Lord of the Light, partly because he's spent some time there. I would highly recommend for those who have not done so that you read the Farseer trilogy, the first one, the Assassin's Apprentice trilogy by Robin Hobb. George R. R. Martin is a big fan of them. There are lots of book series that George R. R. Martin gains inspiration from for A Song of Ice and Fire, but this is one of the ones that is not mentioned enough, in my view. It has this this character who is a bastard who has this power of what's called the wit, where he has a strong connection with a dog, and as part of this, he dies and walks into his wolf, and he is then brought back, and he has to be coaxed out of his wolf and back into his body. Now, if you look at any of the front covers of those books, you will see a big quote from George R. R. Martin on the front saying how amazing they are. He hasn't just read them, he loves those stories. And I think that is a big nod to what's going to be happening with Jon and Ghost. So the Farseer trilogy, look for Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Okay, where were we at? I was just going to have a check to see if I've got anything. So Zachary Riley, thank you so much for the super chat, saying thanks for everything, Robert. Long night awaits. It does indeed. Really looking forward to that. The Long Night is obviously what George R. R. Martin wants the prequel spin-off to be called. Lehiru Dinalankara says, this chat is not enough. Gonna check Patreon. Great. Patrons, this is my time. I always do it. Thank you so much. I cannot do this without your support. This is what allows me to dedicate the time that I do to producing the videos and doing things like this. So thank you so much. For those who don't know, Patreon is a way that you can support creators that you wish to support, not just me, lots and lots of people. I would highly recommend you check out Patreon generally if you wish to support creatives that you get a lot of value from. As far as I'm concerned, yes, it's a way for people to support me. It's also somewhere where I can provide extra material for my patrons. So I provide a whole range of other sort of benefits, one of which is priority questions for these live streams. Another is at certain levels chance to have an input into future content. During last season of Game of Thrones, I gave a few options of videos to do, and whatever got the most votes, I did a video on that. I also do some exclusive audio narration for my patrons. So I've done some audio narrations from the pre-release chapters of The Winds of Winter, for example. You can find on there. So there's a whole load of stuff there from my patrons, but this is just me saying thank you. If you are interested in becoming a patron, there's a link down there in the description. That's either to support the channel or get access to those extra things. So thank you very much for that. Let's go back to another question from my patrons. Krishna Bhargav says, I was told that the Watchmen series is interesting and based on a book. I don't know anything else about it yet. Do you think that will be interesting? Yeah, so this is one of those things where so Watchmen is graphic novel. It's sort of a superhero graphic novel. It's quite dark. I dipped into it, but I'm not going to pretend that I am in any way an expert. So there is a series coming on it, of that much I am very aware. I'm not personally going to be covering it on this channel. There are, I think, many other people who will be able to cover it a lot better than I can. So I would highly recommend you go out and check out those other channels. But from what I hear, if you're a fan of sort of superhero graphic novels, then this is as good as it gets. This is really good stuff. So yes, is what I hear. It's very good, and I'm sure there are people in the chat who have a lot more knowledge on this one. But yeah, I hear it's good, but I won't be covering it on this channel. My last question from my patrons, and then I'm going to dip into the chat a little bit more before we finish up. So this is probably a good time to be dropping any last questions in the chat. I'll probably go for about another 10, maybe 15 minutes after this. Bonds says, my Game of Thrones journey is now over. Only the Blu-ray DVDs to wait for. So we need a new book. Regarding other material on this channel, I would appreciate an order of things to get up to speed on. Previously read Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, etc. So in terms of other things to read to sort of prepare for what's coming up on this channel, pardon me, sorry. So with Black Mirror, there are no books, so that's just show. There's nothing else that needs to be done on that. In terms of the ongoing material for A Song of Ice and Fire and all the rest of it, I would highly recommend. I know Bonds, you've read a huge amount, but if you haven't, the books themselves, A Song of Ice and Fire, obviously excellent. I was talking about it earlier, but I would highly recommend the Duncan Egg stories. They're just a series of novellas under the title A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Really interesting and good. And there are some sort of more background history things like Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire that are also adding to sort of the lore going on there. In terms of Lord of the Rings stuff, obviously the books themselves, there are the Silmarillion, for those who don't know it, is the sort of the big back history, legends, lore of the world of Middle-earth, effectively. So that's the other main thing in that world. For Westworld, then no, again, that there is no particular book that they're basing on. This is a straight-to-screen thing. The other thing which hasn't come up yet, but I'm considering doing, I get quite a mixed reaction from this, so I'm largely going to wait and see what the trailer looks like and things like that, is The Witcher. Now, The Witcher, most people know as some video games. They're really good video games, incidentally, but they're based on a series of books. Now, Netflix are making a show of this. It's going to be quite a big budget. They've got Henry Cavill in to be playing Geralt, who's the main character of this. It looks like it probably will be quite good. The books themselves, I'm partway through. There's about half a dozen of them. I would, just as a general thing, I would recommend the ones that I've read, the short stories in particular. The Last Wish is the first collection, which has got some great little stories in there. Even if I don't cover them, I would recommend reading them because they're quite fun stories. But the thing that attracts me to the stories actually is the fact that although they come across at first glance and at first play of the games and all the rest of it as being kind of like a standard fantasy hack and slash. Here's a guy who's got lots of magical abilities to fight lots of big monsters. You slowly become aware that there are other layers going on that aren't telegraphed, but they are there. There's a huge amount of issues there to do with actually quite dark issues about ethnic cleansing and things like that that seem to be going on in the background. And then you start to realize that there's also the character you assumed was going to be like the hero, the protagonist of the story, actually is really just a support part in a much bigger story that's going on with a much more important character. So it does start to subvert your expectations, and it's not just a guy with a sword goes and kills a monster. There are layers to it. So I'm gonna keep on reading those stories. So if you're interested in book recommendations, that would be quite good. And I know there are quite a few other content creators. I know JR over on Geek Chat 1 is going to be looking at this. So there are people who are going to be covering it if you're interested. But yeah, let me know in the chat if that's something that you would like it. So tell your fans, this is Lahiro Adina Lankara again, tell your fans about A Song of Ice and Fire audiobooks, mate. The audio books, yeah, so if you don't want to read them, then go for the audiobooks. What I would personally highly recommend, actually, with Duncan Egg, the audiobooks for Duncan Egg read by Larry Lloyd, who was the guy who was who played Viserys in the show, but he does such an amazing job as a reader of the stories. I would highly recommend it as a way into Duncan Egg. It's just he gets so much wonder and joy and life out of it that yeah, I would suggest that as the best way into Duncan Egg, actually, even more than just reading the books. Chrissy Voldstone's one of my fantastic moderators, just with a super chat. Thank you, Chrissy, saying congrats on 130,000 subs. Yeah, so I hit 130,000 subscribers around the end of the season. So it was pretty mind blowing what happened with the channel during the season. It's all starting to calm down again now, but thank you so much, Chrissy. I really appreciate that. And Donna Daly saying in the books, everyone Dany has killed have felt just. In the show, the first that felt wrongish were the Tarleys. I think in the books it'll be Fagon. What do you think? Yeah, so certainly on the show, I think that this was part of the reason why Dany's actions at King's Landing felt a little bit like a hard handbrake turn, because whenever she'd been using fire to be burning people or things before, it was just the masters of the Unsullied. Well, okay, we don't really have that much sympathy for slave masters. For the warlocks in Karth, well, you know, they were trying to imprison her and her dragons. That's kind of understandable, and so on. It all the time. It kind of like, yeah, I kind of get why that is. The Tarleys, I think, were set up to make us question her in a way that I suspect for most people, because Randall Tarley had been set up to be such a bad guy, actually we didn't have as much sympathy for them as we perhaps could have done. I think they were trying to use that as a way to kind of warn us that she would be burning anyone. So I think perhaps that was slightly a misstep there on the part of the showrunners. But in the books, burning Fagon, yeah, I think that will happen. So one of the the vision she has in the House of the Undying, then she's there. Basically, she's going to be trying to reveal falsehoods for what they are. Is one of the things that she's going to be doing, and one of them is heavily hinted at. Is the Mama's Dragon, who seems to be Fagon. So yes, I think that she will burn him, and because he's in the way of her getting on the throne, to be honest. So I think that that will be a big pointer that she's perhaps not this goody-goody character. Let's quickly dip into a few more questions. Susan Dunkel is saying, I remember when you had 10,000. Congratulations. Yeah, I remember that as well. I had 10,000 roughly at the end of season 7 of Game of Thrones. So yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you. Scott Koenig doing a shout out to the amazing mods again. Fantastic. I didn't see one spoiler this season in the chat. That is amazing. And as I said earlier, it's astonishing that people were dropping literally every few seconds. People were trying to drop spoilers in the chat. Don't ask me why. This is just what some people wanted to do, but the moderators were all over it, and people were spared it, and I am hugely grateful for them. Kelso Sunshine says Dany has a dark side for sure. She is reactionary at times to her downfall, possibly. Yeah, I think that's right. There's a good little debate going on between Agreed Weirwood and Andrew Kay about Sam. If Sam wants democracy, if he sets up a public education, non-foul based communication or information system, that might work quite well. Yeah. So the idea of democracy, when Sam was introducing it, yes, that we got a laugh. Everybody was found it highly amusing. It clearly Westeros wasn't ready for a full suffrage and democracy across the piece. But if Sam was wanting to do something, then it makes sense for him to actually do the slightly more boring things about widening education, getting rid of the monopoly of information that's in the Citadel, improving communication systems and things like that. So that is definitely the way to develop in the future. So some kind of council of elders, which is what they came up with, seems to be the best that they could possibly have done. Okay, I think so. Knights of Old, I'll just try and pick this one up because Susan D was saying try tagging Robert. Let's see whether there's I can try and. Will you cover the Hobbit book is the question, or just movies? So in terms of, this is a question about my Lord of the Rings content. So I'm not going to be just covering the movies. What I'm going to be covering is the world, the kind of the legendarium of Tolkien. That's where my heart and passion is. I think that the Lord of the Rings movies were fantastic and brilliant, and as good as anyone could have hoped. And I will obviously be referencing them, but it's in the same way that with A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, then I take the books as being the ultimate lore, and then the show is just maybe shining a bit of a light on things and taking some things in a slightly different way. My aim is to be explaining and expounding on the lore of the world that Tolkien created, not just looking at the films themselves or indeed the show. So I imagine that I will treat the show when it happens in much the same way that I've been treating Game of Thrones. I'll probably do episode breakdowns and the like, but also as between now and then, I'm going to be exploring the world. So for example, I'll be answering the questions that people seem to be having at the moment, like what is the Second Age, and what are the ages of Middle Earth and Arda and all the rest of it? What does that all mean? And there'll be a few things that, I mean, there are some, well, hopefully you will see what I'm trying to do is just expand and explain the world that Tolkien created, and I will use the show as a way to do that. So that's my overall vision and hope, and it's where my passion is. So that's where I'm going to be going with it. Andrew K saying, do you see any major difference with this council setup versus previous councils? I don't see much difference to past monarch selection councils in Westeros, or that corruption will be avoided. Yeah, I agree completely. My take on that council and the new way of doing things was that actually the only difference was that everybody seems to accept the principle that the king's children do not automatically inherit. Now, if you go back through Fire and Blood, you just see, actually, you know what, the named heir often didn't inherit. So the idea that this was some principle that everybody adhered to and it was all fine and dandy, that just wasn't the case. The amount of times that you got Maegor the Cruel took the crown by power, Jaehaerys his supporters took the crown for him by power. There was a named heir that they just ignored effectively. He set up a great council to decide on who should take over after him. The Dance of the Dragons was a huge fight about who was the heir. So this was not, just in the space of 100 years or so, we've got at least 4 that I thought of the top of my head times when the Targaryens couldn't decide on who was going to take over. And so as then it will be in the future with this system, wherever the power is, they get to decide who the monarch is. And the power in that council was very clearly with the Starks. They had a majority. Once you add up the Starks who were there and all the people like Brienne and Davos and the like, who were sort of owed their votes to the Starks, they clearly had a blocking majority, and they decided. So again, as it always was, with the power lies, where the power lies is who decides and who's going to be king, not some kind of like magical line of succession. Okay, guys, I think I am going to end at that point. Thank you. There's some fantastic questions going on there, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity, particular, not just to talk about Game of Thrones, but just to start to explore a few of these other things that we're going to be covering on the channel. If you're watching this a little bit later, and if you're at all interested in my second channel that I was talking about earlier, The Well Told Tale, that's me reading audio narrations, then there's going to be a link appearing somewhere here. If you're watching a bit later and you're interested in Patreon, supporting the channel or getting access to some other materials, there should be a link appearing somewhere up here. Thanks, everyone. Take care. I will be back this time next Thursday. Until then, have a good time. See you.